I really struggled with today's message. It's a time that we live in that calls out for the generous. And yet, when I went searching, it was hard for me to find. I framed today's service around generosity of time and talent and treasure, but I don't know about you. Some days for me, it just feels like that's a very hard ask. How do we figure out how to be generous in a time, in a place, in a world that takes and takes and takes? How do we find ways to be generous when we feel like it takes everything we have just to make it through the day? Just to answer that phone call, just as Mary says, to make sure we can support our government that isn't always doing exactly what we want it to do. It's a hard time for generosity here at the end of history. You know that, right? Every day is the end of history. The world is created anew, and we have to find ways to make sure that we can be generous with the time that we have been given. The moment, the hour, the day, the moment of compassion and care. I truly believe that generosity is perhaps a renewable and sustainable resource. It's probably something that we can never run out of. It's the stuff, like we talked about in our Time for All Ages, that's inside me, that's inside you, that reaches out to the very heavens throughout all space and all time. There's no end to the stuff that makes us one human body. There's no end to the stuff that connects us. And yet our capacity to give, our capacity to be generous changes based on varying circumstances, right? We know that it is sometimes easier to be generous when we already feel good about ourselves. It can be easier to feel generous when we know we have sufficient resources of treasure, financial resources, those are. It can be easier or feel easier to be generous when we know that we're affirmed, loved, held in the communities that we call most dear. Perhaps that's where we always need to start, making sure that the conditions of being in community are fully met. And that's the challenge of community. We'll come back to that. We also know that it can feel easier to be generous when we think we have enough hours in the day, when we believe we can actually complete all the tasks on our task list. And I'll take an aside here. I know I have tasks that I put on my task list 15 years ago because Apple makes it so. We might not ever complete all of the tasks on our task list, and that's something that brings me joy when I'm in the right mood to receive that. Rather than looking at an endless list of tasks, there is perhaps a baton that we get to pass from generation to generation. We know that the work of collective liberation didn't end when our grandfathers, our grandmothers, our greatest elders, they passed from this life. And so too, the same for us. We know that we will pass the baton with a still to-do list, with a way of being generous, that we did what we could, so it's easier for the next generations to get even further, maybe where we could not. Nonetheless, it is easier to feel generous when we feel like the list is actually manageable. I take a moment right now to think through what it means to understand ourselves as multi-generational beings in community. Maybe that's the root, and I'm going to play with that. Maybe that's the root of what it actually means to be generous. As I was preparing for this message, and as I said, this was a challenge for me, I couldn't figure out how to really frame generosity. I knew I wanted to talk about abundance, I knew giving a title to this message, like our hymn of the month, that I wanted to talk about how we make our own days glad. There's nothing external to us that allows us to be generous. There's nothing external to us that allows us to be in community. The very stuff, the essence that connects each to all is inside each and every one of us, as it always has been, back to time immemorial. And here is a place where the Hawaiian language really helps us out. In the days when I really struggle with a message, I wait and I wait and I wait, and waiting is its own type of prayer. But it's a tricky magic because you never know precisely when that prayer is going to be answered. And it was answered promptly at 5:43 a.m. this morning. When I finally remembered that I understood a deeper meaning of our Hawaiian word for generosity. There are many, depending on what you're getting at, but we'll go with the adjective form, loko maikai. Now, many of you, I'm sure, know maikai, good, sometimes happy, okay, all those good things. Loko is a preposition. It means inside, internal. So loko maikai, generosity in our context is the inside goodness. That worked for me. That worked for me. Our capacity to be generous is measured only by how deeply we hold the goodness that's inside each and every one of us. And that's the same for each and every one of us. We're Unitarian Universalists. We know that each one of you is better than your worst mistake. We know that each one of you is capable of bringing a life-saving message to others in community. And together, when we join the goodness that is inside of us, each one to each other, we have more capacity to do good, to be generous, to take the inside goodness of ourselves and community and turn it outward until your goodness connects to your goodness, connects to your goodness. And what's interior to us is big enough to hold all of us. Loko maikai, I like this idea. I like this context that connects us to this sense of place, this aina here on our beloved chain of islands. It helps us know with certainty that generosity is truly inexhaustible. You can't run out of the goodness inside of you. You can't run out of your ability to be in community. Sure, we'll stumble sometimes. Sure, we'll find it tricky occasionally to march, to dance, to sing, to pray in the light of the divine as our gathering music invites us to. That's what Yukenquenkos means in Zulu. The light of God, the light of the divine, the light of all that is holy. We can make our own days glad by making sure that at the very least, we remind one another of the goodness that is inside each and every one of us. That's all generosity is. This reminder that the good in you is also inside of me, and a willingness to share. Loko maikai, I like that. I like that for this time and this place. I like that for our sharing of time and talent and treasure. I like it for a place and a world that needs more healing. I like that for a people like us who sometimes understand that it's challenging to feel generous, but we know that we can be. Loko maikai, I like that. We take a moment now to reflect on the ways that we can be generous with ourselves and with one another. Reflection questions will be located on the screen in just a moment. You can also find them on the reverse of your order of service at the back. I encourage you to share your thoughts with others in the gallery during hospitality or to have these conversations throughout the week. Let the goodness inside you join with the goodness inside all, until our capacity for generosity is inevitable and all-embracing. Amen, Ashe, and blessed be.